We've been in a series the last few weeks called Divine Detours, and the series has been looking at the life of Joseph found in the book of Genesis, and really how life takes some unexpected turns. Anybody have life take some unexpected turns before? And I think if we were being honest about that, when life does that, it kind of throws us a little bit off track, doesn't it? It's a little unsettling. And a funny story with that, and I've got permission to share this story, by the way. But my wife is not the best of drivers. There's not many curbs in Tallahassee that have not met her in person. So much so we took a trip, a quick little vacation a few weeks ago, and we had to rent a car from Miami to come back to Tallahassee for the Sunday service because our flight kept getting delayed. And so I asked her after she had gotten the car, I said, "Did you get insurance on the rims?" I could care less about the rest of the car, just insurance on the rims. But years ago, we were at my parents' house, and they have this somewhat long driveway, and down one side of the driveway is a bunch of hedges, and then there's a ditch on the other side of the driveway. And so she's backing out of the driveway, and I mean, just having a very difficult time. She kept kind of drifting towards the hedges, and then she'd pull up and back and then drift towards the grass in the ditch and then up and back. And so my dad recognizes that she's having a really difficult time backing out of the driveway. So he comes out, and we all learned something that day about my wife and driving, that as and I don't know how, I'm not even going to say, I did not get permission to say how old she might have been, so I ain't going to say that part. But she had been driving most of her life and never realized that when she's backing up that she could use her side mirrors. And so my dad points this out to her, and she's like, "Oh, now I can kind of see the edge of the driveway, and I can back out a little bit." And I was thinking this week about that and about life, and I think life can be something kind of like that we live life, we go about life, and we feel like we're making the right decisions. We feel like we're going in the right direction, to then find ourselves heading off course towards the bushes or towards a ditch. And I tell you, when we can be in that kind of season of life where it feels like we're making the right decisions, but the outcome of our life just is not headed in the direction that we hope that it would head, that it can be draining, that it can be painful, it can be exhausting emotionally, it can be devastating to us spiritually in life, and whether it's because of the choices that we've made or whether it's the choices that other people have made and we just kind of are in the middle of it, I think it's important that you and I kind of slow down in those seasons and we ask an important question, and that is, how do we navigate seasons in our life where it feels like there's no way of escape? How do we navigate seasons where it doesn't matter what we try to do, we just kind of keep finding ourselves in a ditch? Well, today I want to talk about that a little bit, and I want to talk to you from this title, The Hardship Detour. The Hardship Detour. Last week we talked about the pride detour as we jumped into the story of Joseph. And if you missed last week, we talked about how Joseph's family was a dysfunctional family, that he was the 11th of 12 brothers from a dad who had these kids from 4 different women, and the tension that had to be in that home. Scripture said, I don't know if you remember this, but it said last week that his brothers couldn't say a kind word about him. Do you remember that? Couldn't say a kind word about him. And so Joseph is given a dream. God gives him a dream at 17, and that dream is to begin to paint a picture of his ultimate purpose for his life. And Joseph does what many of us often do when God begins to bless us and to give us direction is instead of making God's purpose for our life about God and about others, we make it about ourselves. And Joseph begins to do that, and I think what we see in life when we do that is that the danger of pride is that it often leads us to make selfish decisions, and the byproduct of those selfish decisions is life ends up going in a direction that we don't plan or we don't expect, and that's what we find with Joseph in this story as God gives him this dream, this purpose. And so what ultimately ends up happening is God begins to allow some things to happen in Joseph's life because there were some lessons that Joseph needed to learn in order for him to be able to live in all that God had for him. And that's really what this series is all about, is identifying those 10 detours in life that God uses to shape our character and to develop us for his purpose for our life. And so in the second part of Genesis chapter 37, last week we looked at the first part. In the second part, Joseph's life takes an unexpected turn. He gets thrown into a pit and he gets left for dead. And I want us to see what happens in this moment. It's 11 verses, so hang with me or follow along on your phone. If you tap the seat, the tap dot in the seat back in front of you, you can follow along with my outline. But let's look at this story and see how it unfolds. In verse 13, when they had been gone, speaking of the brothers, had been gone for some time, Jacob says to Joseph that your brothers are pasturing the sheep at Shechem. Now, I want you to recognize here, we had talked last week about how Joseph was Jacob's favorite son, and we see something kind of striking here is that 11 of the sons are pasturing the sheep. Only one, the favorite, is still at home. And so he's told to go look at the sheep, and so Jacob says, get ready, and I'll send you to them. Joseph says, I'm ready to go. He says, go and see how your brothers and the flocks are getting along. And Jacob said, then come back and bring me a report. Now that had to be right up Joseph's alley, because you remember last week, Joseph's a tattletale. So now he gets to go. He gets to look to see what his brothers are doing, and then he gets to come back and tell on them to dad. And so then come back, tell the report. So Jacob sent him on his way, and Joseph traveled to Shechem from their home in the valley of Hebron. When he arrived there, a man from the area noticed that he was having an ADHD moment, that he was wandering around in the countryside. What are you looking for, he asked. In verse 16, I'm looking for my brothers. Do you know where they are pasturing their sheep? Yes, the man told him. They have moved on from here, but I heard them say, let's go on to Dothan. And if you don't know where Dothan is, it's about an hour and a half from here in Alabama. That's not where this Dothan is, by the way. So Joseph followed his brothers to Dothan and found them there. When Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him, right? They recognized him in the distance. Quick test. How do you think they recognized him? The coat of many colors. Yep. Jacob's favorite gift to his favorite son. And as he approached, they made plans to kill him. Here comes the dreamer, they said. Come on, let's kill him and let's throw him into one of these cisterns. The cisterns in those days were about 30 foot deep. They were wider at the bottom and they got smaller at the top. And so they're about to throw him into one of those. We can tell our father that a wild animal has eaten him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. But when Reuben heard, and Reuben is the oldest of the brothers, when he heard of their scheme, he came to Joseph's rescue. Let's not kill him, he said. In verse 22, why should we shed any blood? Let's just throw him in this empty cistern here in the wilderness, and then he'll die without our laying a hand on him. And then I want you to see something here. Reuben was secretly planning to rescue Joseph and to return him to his father. You know, Reuben is a type and shadow of what Jesus does in our life, that our pit experiences when we find ourselves in dark seasons that don't seem to make sense, where it feels like life is just constantly drifting off course, that God has two purposes for those pit seasons in our life. The first one is to rescue us, and I'm going to tell you in a few minutes what he's rescuing us from. And then the second one is to return us to the Father. In verse 23, it says, so when Joseph arrived, that his brothers ripped off the beautiful robe, and this was kind of symbolic of what God does in our life, because when they ripped off the robe off of Joseph, it was stripping away Jacob's favor on his life. And oftentimes in our life, God will allow us to walk down paths and in seasons and to experience pits as a way to humble us for ultimately his purpose on our life. Because if we are walking in pride in our life, then we have a tendency to make his purpose all about ourselves. But when we're humble, then we don't take the glory for it. We reflect the glory back to God. And so we see in the story, they're ripping off the robe that he's wearing, and in the last verse, it says, then they grabbed him and they threw him into the cistern. I want us to take a few moments and I want you to think about this experience, this moment from Joseph's perspective. I want you to imagine how he had to have felt, how he felt physically. He's getting thrown into a 30-foot pit that his body had to have rubbed and scraped up against the side of the pit as he begins to make his way down, and then the impact of when his body finally hits the bottom of this dry cistern. And you could imagine the bruising that was happening in his body. You could imagine the bleeding. You could imagine that he was disoriented for a moment, and for the most part is in complete darkness. Like maybe he's able to look up 30 feet high in a pit that's wider at the bottom where he's at and begins to get narrow at the top, and maybe he's able to see just a little bit of sunlight. Imagine what had to be going through his mind, that these dreams that God ends up giving him, that he had to have felt like that was a cruel joke in this season. Like, God, I don't understand how could you give me this dream, and how could you say this is what you're going to do in my life, but this is what I'm currently experiencing. The pit for Joseph wasn't just a place of physical suffering, it was a place of emotional suffering too. I mean, the confusion of what's going on in his life and what's his future going to look like, the frustration that he had, the internal frustration of God has spoken this to me, but this is my present reality, the sense of betrayal that his own brothers would would throw him to the bottom of the pit and leave him to die, that betrayal had to be overwhelming for him in the season. But what Joseph doesn't recognize in the moment is that there's a hope beyond the pit. That the pit wasn't the end of his story, but it was a necessary stop on the road to God's purpose for his life. And maybe some of you find yourself in that season, in that place today. You feel like life has thrown you into a pit, and it's left you there, and you're hurting this morning. You're confused this morning of why is this happening to you? You're unsure of how you're going to get out of the season that you're in. You're asking the same or similar questions that Joseph was asking and having a hard time reconciling. How can God possibly have a plan and a purpose for me when this is my present reality? You're not just physically hurting, but you're emotionally hurting. Life has knocked you down in ways that you never expected. The people that you trusted, that you cared about, have let you down, or you find yourself in this season not even because of your own doing or your own choices, but because of circumstances that are beyond your control. And friend, if that's you today, you have the same hope ahead of you that Joseph had. That no matter how painful or dark this season may seem, it's not the end of your story. That what God is writing in your life, your current reality, is not the end of your story. You know, I've learned this about life, and maybe you can relate to it a little bit too, is that God doesn't cause it all, but He'll certainly use it all. And what does He use the experiences and the seasons that we go through? What does He use it to do? He uses it to shape us. He uses it to build our character and to grow our faith and our trust in Him, and to prepare us for the purpose that He has on our life. You know, if you're in a pit right now, I want you to recognize this, and this is what I kind of set up earlier in the scripture. I want you to recognize this about God, that God didn't send Jesus just to save you from your sin, but also to save you from yourself. I've learned this about me in my life, is that I can do plenty of damage in my life all by myself. Like, I don't need Satan's help. I don't need other people's help to do damage in my life. Like, I can do enough damage in my life all by myself. And these pit experiences that we face and that we walk through are designed in such a way that God uses them to rescue us from ourselves and to return us back to the heart of the Father. And so how do we respond in these seasons? How do we respond when we find ourselves in the pit? Because at the end of the day, the pit isn't just a story from Joseph's life in the Bible, but it's part of our story and part of our lives too. I think our natural response to hardship and pits in our life is get me out of here. Like, as quick as I can run, as quick as my situation could change, I just want out of here. But I think before we react like this to just try to change the situation that we're in, I think that we need to ask ourselves a couple questions. And I think we could look at these two questions as our side mirrors. That when we're backing out of the driveway of life and we're drifting into the hedges or towards the ditch, that we can use these two questions as side mirrors to make sure that our life is continuing to head in the right direction. The first question is, what got me into the pit? I think this is a question that a lot of times we look over, that we fail to take ownership of our own actions, our own attitudes that have gotten us into the pit. And we have a tendency, just a natural tendency that all of us have, is to blame other people. We can blame the economy for the financial pit we're in. We can blame our boss for the pit that we're in with our career and our job. We can blame friends, right? We can blame a lot of stuff. We can blame family members for the emotional trauma that we experience. We can blame our parents and their dysfunctional marriage for our dysfunctional marriage. And I'm not downplaying the trauma or the impact of those things, but what I am highlighting is that you and I all have a choice to make in our journey. And that yes, we can have some things that have impacted our life along the way, but if we really slow down to think about it, you and I can do some things too that get us into that pit. See, real change happens when we stop and we ask, what part did I play? I may not have played 100% of what got me here, but did I play 10%? Did I play 40%? Did I pay 70%? Like, what got me here? Because friend, we can't change what we don't acknowledge. And what God does is God allows us to experience these pit seasons in our life. Notice this, in order to help us see the areas of our heart and our character that won't support His ultimate purpose for our life. It's that rescuing us from ourselves. Think about those pit seasons in your life, and I think about mine, and I think about how God used those seasons to help break down some bad attitudes, to help break down some bad thinking, to help break down the victim mentality, right? And God uses those seasons, and although they are uncomfortable in the process, they're necessary. I think the second question, the second kind of side mirror for us in our lives is this question: what will we believe about the pit? So we're going to take some ownership for what we did that got us there, but what are we going to believe about the season that we find ourselves in? See, every pit in life has two competing voices. And the one that we choose to believe is ultimately going to shape how long we stay in the pit. The first voice that we experience when we find ourselves in the pit is Satan's voice. And his voice always brings kind of the Bible word, the theological word is condemnation. Condemnation is a word that means that he is accusing, he's attacking. And Revelation chapter 12 says that Satan is the accuser of the brethren. And his strategy it's subtle, but it's effective. See if you could recognize this cycle in your life that Satan attacks you as a person when you're in the pit. Like he comes right at you. He attacks your identity in Christ and who you are, to the point that you begin to feel ashamed and defeated and hopeless. And then he begins to come at you with false truths, like distorting the truth. And I don't know if you picked up on this in your life, but the best lies are the ones that have half-truths in them. And Satan is great at doing that. We see that even in the story of Joseph. That Joseph's brothers end up making up a story and using Joseph's bloodied robe to convince their dad that Joseph was dead. And for 22 years, Jacob went to bed every single night grieving over his lost son. And I can't help but to visualize and to think about that moment and to think about the evenings that Jacob grieved over Joseph in the same house that the brothers were living at night. And they're hearing their dad grieve, and they do nothing about it. And that's what Satan does to us when we're in a pit. And it ends up creating this fear and confusion where we begin to think that nothing's going to change. My present reality is my new normal. And he uses those things in order to pull us further away from God, making us feel unworthy and ashamed, and let's be honest, sometimes even angry at God. But there's a second voice. And the second voice is God's voice. And God doesn't bring condemnation, he brings conviction. And there's a huge difference between the two. You see, condemnation that Satan attacks us with is saying something like you're the problem, like he's attacking you as an individual, where conviction says your sin is the problem. You see the difference between the two? One is attacking you as a person. The other is attacking the sin in our life. And that's why I personally think that conviction is such a beautiful thing in our life. I think it's arguably the most gracious thing that God does for us besides salvation, because it's God's way of rescuing us from ourselves and returning us back to a place of dependence upon Him. Friend, today, if you find yourself in a pit, I want you to walk out of here and to realize this reality, that the pit it's not punishment. It's preparation. That when life is knocking you down, and when you feel hurt and you feel confused and you feel unsure about how to move forward, that God uses those seasons to draw us closer to Him. That's why the pit, that it isn't a place of rejection or even a place of retaliation for what you've done. It's a place of reconnection. It's a place that God allows us to experience, to draw us back to His heart. And Jesus helps us understand why we need the pit in our life, why we need it. He says in John 15:5, that I am the vine and that you are the branches. That those who remain in me and I in them, that you're going to live out your purpose in life. That's what producing much fruit is all about. Friend, fruit on the tree isn't for the tree, it's for the people that pass by the tree. God's desire, His purpose for our life isn't just about accumulating things for ourselves, but it's about making an impact and a difference in the lives of other people, that we're leaving a legacy beyond ourselves. And Jesus says this, for apart from me, you could do nothing. Friend, our good intentions to try to make a difference, to try to be good parents, to try to be a good spouse, to try to be good. That's what our culture says, be a good person. But our desire to be a good person apart from Jesus, we can do nothing. The impact that we make, it's minimal. So friend, today, if you find yourself in a season like this, if you find yourself in a pit and you're confused and it's dark and there seems to be no way of escape, my question to you is, what will you choose to believe? Will you choose to believe that this is God's retaliation upon you, or that this is an opportunity for reconnection? That God loves you so much and He wants you to walk in His purpose for your life so much that He's willing to send His one and only Son, Jesus, to die on a cross, not so you could have a second chance, but so you could have another chance to living a life on purpose, God's ultimate best for your life. But at the end of the day, it's all about perspective. Will you look at the season that you're in right now, and will you see it as a dead end of punishment or a detour of preparation? God has great plans and desires for you. But sometimes you and I need rescued from ourselves in order to walk and experience it. Would you bow your head with me this morning? And I want you to take a moment and just kind of still yourself, and I want you to reflect on the season that you're in, and I want you to reflect on these two questions. What have you allowed in your life? What have you done that has gotten you to the pit? What kind of ownership do you need to take there? And which voice are you going to believe? Friend, I believe God would want you to hear today that your pit is not pointless. That the thing that you think is breaking you down might be the thing that God is using to ultimately build you up. So don't listen to the voice of the enemy in the season that's attacking you as a person and telling you things aren't going to change. But listen to the voice of your Father that is inviting you into a right relationship with Him, inviting you into a heart posture and a behavior posture that is going to position you for His best for your life. Don't pull away, but lean in this season and watch what He does.
Hey, thank you for watching today's message. We hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you're subscribed down below to stay up to date with all of Transformation Church's life-changing content. Make sure you like, comment, or even share if you enjoyed today's message and it had an impact on your life. You never know what one share can do to someone else's life forever. For all of our service times and service locations, make sure you check us out online at transformedtlh.com. And hey, we would love to see your face in the place this Sunday.